So being smart is doing what? Sitting down with the other superpower that has a hell of a lot to lose, just like us, and that would be the Russians. I maintain the fact the Russians can be our best ally in fighting ISIS. I maintain the fact that the Russians, they're not screwing around. And if Putin wants to use the word revenge, and if Putin wants to use the word restitution, that's right up the conservative alley, isn't it? Let's turn now to Steve Clemons, Washington editor-at-large for The Atlantic. Steve, good to have you with us today.
Good morning, Ed. How are you?
Good. I maintain the position that the Russians play a big card in defeating ISIS. And I think that this meeting between Putin and Obama at the G20 is huge. I mean, I wish I was a fly in the corner listening on that one. Despite the differences that we have, is this a chance? You know, you've got the Russians out there bombing yesterday indiscriminately without concern for civilians. Putin is using the word revenge and restitution. Your thoughts on all this?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think that we've had a very awkward relationship with the Russians for some time, from Crimea, Ukraine, differences over Bashar al-Assad. But now with one of our principal allies and the Russians themselves and what we saw happen in Lebanon, it has put us on the same side of the equation again. And they've got military capacity inside Syria, willing to deploy it ferociously. And I absolutely agree with you that the world sees much more unity of purpose going after ISIS now than they would have with the United States and Russia playing games with each other and pretending to go after ISIS. So it just seems to me that what's fallen into place is vital if ISIS is going to be really knocked back on a military front.
What about the United States and Russia collectively making a statement saying, NATO, you got to check in on this? What about that?
Well, I think it's important, and because I think a lot of the NATO states have come out of a point where their economies have been dismal. They're wary of further deepening entanglements. The Afghanistan entanglement of NATO was very uncomfortable and costly for many of them. But you don't get the luxury of picking when challenges pop up like this, and NATO's pretending like it can. Now with the attack by in France, in Paris, with France invoking a never invoked clause of the EU treaty that folks are sort of circling around cautiously. But yeah, I mean, I think with both the President of the United States and Russia calling on NATO to take more of a role, it's hard for NATO to sit on the sideline.
Okay, we're seeing a new Putin now. We're seeing him react, should I say, in a very aggressive manner. I mean, he talks tough in the past, but damn it, he is going to get restitution and revenge for those innocent civilians, those Russians who were downed on that plane in the Sinai. Is this going to continue? I mean, what's your prediction on exactly how Putin's going to handle this in the long run?
There are different drivers now, Ed. I don't want to get too wonky for folks, but I think part of why Putin went into Syria was to protect Assad. Part of why he went in was to embarrass the United States. And part of why he went in is it would have been the first time in 42 years that Russia had been able to take any kind of military, muscular action in the Middle East, because the United States always preempted and left no space for Russia to be involved. Now Russia's involved in a big way in the Syria-Iraq mess, and it's also getting involved in Libya. And so there are drivers that have to do with the way Russia perceives its global prestige and what it wants to be involved in that are strategically important, that go beyond the revenge factor for what happened with the Russian airliner out of Egypt. But now he's chosen a course that if he did want to get out of it, he can't, because the Russian people see that their plane and innocent civilians were murdered with a bomb attack by ISIS on an airliner. And so much like a 9/11 incident, they have to now deepen their involvement and engagement. And I think one of the things that's important to remember is deepening an involvement and engagement doesn't mean you're going to win, doesn't mean this is going to be an easy fight. And it could be what President Obama has always worried about, that there is a quagmire when you have a civil war with a proxy battle on top. It's complicated. So Russia is in the game, and it has nowhere to go but deeper into the game, because it's got real skin in this struggle now, and hundreds of its people have been killed. So it can't take another course. So that anger that that vengefulness that you're referring to is essentially Putin with no other course.
Yeah. Your thoughts on how the authorization of the use of military force is going to go? The president asked for it 16 months ago. I think there's clearly an anti-Obama element playing out in Congress here, but now they're at a breaking point. They got to move on this. Your thoughts?
I hope they do, Ed, but, I live in D.C., and I am just astounded by the continuing lack of adult behavior in Congress when it comes to these moments of major challenge. And I think that you've got one giant faction in the Democratic side that wants to see an AUMF go forward, but really wants to put heavy restraints on what that authorization allows. And then you've got others, mainly in the Republican side, but some Democrats who want to see a much more robust authorization that does not tie the president's hands and constrict, if you will, the options for conducting a battle against ISIS. But, after 9/11, there was a view that the authorization of use for force then just created too big a hole for everything to go through. And I don't see that battle between those factions ending. I don't see a clarity coming out of the Paris issue that would tie this up. So, I hope I'm wrong. It's one of the areas that I don't want to be right, but I don't see that fundamental knot getting untied right now.
Steve Clemons, always a pleasure. Good to have you with us. Appreciate your insight again. Thank you. You bet. Washington editor-at-large of The Atlantic.